The howling wind shrieked through the Montana territory like a wounded animal, and Samuel Evans knew that if he did not get his horses settled soon, the blizzard would claim them all before dawn broke over his ranch 3 miles outside of Miles City. It was February of 1881, and this winter had proven itself one of the most brutal Samuel had witnessed in his 32 years of life. The snow had been falling for 2 days straight, transforming his modest ranch into an isolated island of white. He stumbled through drifts that reached his knees, his lantern swinging wildly as he fought his way toward the barn. The structure loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the swirling snow, and he pushed through the door with his shoulder, nearly falling inside as the wind tried to tear it from his grip. The barn was warmer than outside, but not by much. His breath still clouded the air as he hung the lantern on its hook and began checking on the horses. They nickered nervously, their eyes wide with the primal fear that came from sensing nature's fury. Samuel moved down the line, speaking softly to each one, checking their water and feed when he heard it, a sound that did not belong. A whimper, soft and human, coming from the far corner where he kept the hay bales stacked high. His hand instinctively went to the revolver at his hip, but he did not draw it. Instead, he grabbed the lantern and approached slowly, his boots crunching on the scattered hay. As the light spread across the corner, he saw her. She was huddled between 2 bales, her body curled tight against the cold, wearing nothing but a thin dress that had once been white but was now stained with mud and blood. Her feet were bare and blue, and her dark hair hung in wet tangles around a face so pale it nearly matched the snow outside. She looked up at him with eyes that held both terror and resignation, as though she had already accepted whatever fate he might bring. Samuel stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. A woman, out here in this storm, dressed like that. She should have been dead already. "Easy now," he said, keeping his voice low and gentle as he would with a spooked horse. "I am not going to hurt you." She did not respond, just watched him with those haunted eyes. He could see she was shaking violently, her lips tinged blue. He set the lantern down and shrugged off his heavy coat. "You need to get warm, or you will be dead by morning." He held the coat out to her, but she did not move to take it. Her arms remained wrapped around herself, whether from cold or fear he could not tell. Samuel took another step closer and knelt down, moving slowly. "My name is Samuel Evans. This is my ranch. Whatever happened to you, whatever you are running from, right now the only thing that matters is getting you warm. Will you let me help you?" Something in his tone must have reached her because her eyes flickered with a spark of something beyond the emptiness. She gave the smallest nod. He draped the coat around her shoulders, and she clutched it with trembling fingers. "Can you walk?" "My house is not far, but in this storm it might as well be miles." "I can try," she whispered, and her voice was hoarse, barely audible over the wind that rattled the barn walls. Samuel helped her to her feet, and she immediately stumbled. He caught her, feeling how light she was, how fragile. Without asking, he swept her up into his arms. She tensed at first, but then went limp, too exhausted to protest. The journey from the barn to his house was one of the most difficult of Samuel's life. The wind seemed determined to knock him down, and the snow bit at his face like tiny teeth. He bent over the woman in his arms, trying to shield her as best he could with his body. By the time he kicked open his front door, his muscles were screaming and his lungs burned from the cold air. Inside, he wasted no time. He carried her straight to the fireplace, where coals still glowed from the fire he had built before going to check on the horses. He laid her on the rug and immediately set about building the fire back up. The flames caught quickly, and soon heat began to radiate through the room. He turned to look at her properly for the first time in the light. She was young, perhaps mid-20s, with delicate features and skin that would have been olive-toned if not for the pallor of hypothermia. The blood he had seen was coming from cuts on her feet and scratches on her arms. Her dress was torn in places, and his jaw tightened as he considered what that might mean. "I need to check your feet," he said. "Frostbite can set in quick." She nodded, still not speaking, and Samuel knelt beside her. Her feet were in bad shape, cut and bruised and dangerously cold. He went to the kitchen and pumped water into a basin, warming it slightly on the stove but not too much. Too hot water on frozen flesh could cause more damage. He returned and began to carefully clean her feet, wincing at some of the deeper cuts. "These are going to need bandaging. Looks like you have been walking for quite some time." 3 days, she said suddenly, her voice stronger now. "I have been walking for 3 days." Samuel looked up at her face. 3 days? In this weather, how are you still alive?" "I found shelter where I could. Caves, overhangs. Last night I saw your barn in the distance. It took me until nightfall to reach it." She paused and her eyes met his. "I thought it was empty. I was just going to rest until the storm passed, then move on." "Move on to where?" She looked away. "Anywhere that is not where I came from." Samuel did not press. He finished cleaning her feet and wrapped them in clean bandages from his medical supplies. Then he stood and went to his bedroom, returning with a thick wool blanket and one of his flannel shirts. "You need to get out of that wet dress. I will turn around. Put this shirt on and wrap yourself in the blanket." He turned his back and stared at the wall while he heard the rustle of fabric. When she told him it was safe, he turned to find her swimming in his shirt, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked impossibly small and vulnerable. "Thank you," she said, and there were tears in her eyes now. "You did not have to help me." "Yes, I did," Samuel said simply. "Are you hungry?" She nodded, and he realized she was probably starving. He went to the kitchen and began preparing food. His cooking skills were basic, born of necessity from years of living alone, but he managed to heat up leftover stew and cut thick slices of bread. He brought it to her, and she ate slowly at first, then faster, as though her body was only now remembering what hunger felt like. While she ate, Samuel stoked the fire higher and dragged his rocking chair closer to the hearth. "You can take my bed tonight. I will sleep out here." She shook her head immediately. "I cannot take your bed. You can and you will. You are still recovering from exposure. The bedroom will be warmer, and the bed is more comfortable than the floor." She looked like she wanted to argue but was too exhausted. "What is your name?" Samuel asked. "You know mine, but I do not know yours." She was quiet for a moment, as though deciding whether to trust him with even this small piece of information. "Nora," she said finally. "Nora Sullivan." "Well, Nora Sullivan, you are safe here. Whatever you are running from, it cannot reach you tonight, not in this storm." Her eyes filled with fresh tears, and one spilled down her cheek. "I do not know how to thank you. Get some rest. That is thanks enough." He helped her to the bedroom and made sure she was settled before returning to the main room. He dragged a chair close to the fire and sat down, but sleep did not come. His mind was full of questions. What had driven a young woman out into a blizzard wearing nothing but a thin dress? Who was she running from? And what was he supposed to do with her once the storm cleared? The storm did not clear. It raged for 3 more days, and Samuel found himself trapped in his house with a mysterious woman who spoke little and jumped at every loud noise. During the days, he kept the fires burning and made simple meals. Nora stayed mostly in the bedroom at first, emerging only to eat or use the facilities out back when the wind died down enough to make the trip possible. But gradually, she began to spend more time in the main room. She would sit by the fire, wrapped in blankets, and watch him as he worked on repairing tack or whittled small pieces of wood. Sometimes He would catch her staring at him with an expression he could not read. On the third day, while they were eating lunch, she finally spoke about what had happened. "I was supposed to get married," she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "To a man named Gerald Hoskins. He owns a large ranch about 40 miles east of here." Samuel waited, not pushing her but letting her tell the story at her own pace. "I met him in Miles City last fall. I worked at the restaurant there and he would come in regularly. He was charming at first, attentive. He asked my father for permission to court me." Her hands tightened around her cup. "My father said yes. He was so pleased that a man of Gerald's standing was interested in me." "You did not want to marry him," Samuel said. "It was not a question. At first I thought I did. He was handsome and successful, and everyone told me how lucky I was. But as the wedding got closer, he changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. He became controlling, jealous. He did not like me talking to other men, even customers at the restaurant. He would get angry over the smallest things." She paused, and Samuel could see the tension in her shoulders. "2 weeks before the wedding, I told him I wanted to postpone it. I was not ready. He got angry, angrier than I had ever seen him. He grabbed my arm so hard he left bruises. He told me I was his, and I would marry him whether I wanted to or not." Samuel felt his jaw clench. "I went to my father, showed him the bruises, told him I did not want to marry Gerald. But my father—" Her voice broke. "My father said I was being dramatic, that every marriage had difficulties, and I needed to learn to be obedient. He told me the wedding would go forward as planned." "So you ran," Samuel said quietly. She nodded. "The day before the wedding. I took nothing, just left in the middle of the night. I knew Gerald would come after me, and I knew my father would help him look. I just started walking west, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. Then the storm came. You could have died. I know. Part of me did not care. I would rather die free than live as Gerald's wife." She looked at him, and her eyes were fierce now, not haunted. "Does that make me wicked?" "No," Samuel said firmly. "It makes you brave. Though not smart, perhaps, running into a blizzard with no supplies." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "I did not plan it well, I admit. This Gerald, he sounds like a man who would not give up easily." Her smile faded. "No, he will be looking for me, and when he finds me—" "If he finds you," Samuel corrected. "And if he comes here, he will have to go through me." She stared at him. "Why would you do that? You do not know me. I am nothing to you. You are someone who needed help, and I was in a position to give it. That is enough." Something shifted in her expression then, a softening that made her look younger. "You are a good man, Samuel Evans. I am just a man doing what is right." The storm finally broke on the 4th day. Samuel woke to silence, the absence of howling wind so sudden and complete it was jarring. He rose from his chair by the fire, his back aching from days of sleeping sitting up, and went to the window. The world outside was transformed, buried under feet of snow that sparkled in the weak morning sun. Nora emerged from the bedroom, still wrapped in blankets. "It stopped." "Yes. But it will be days before anyone can travel. The roads will be impassable." She nodded, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. Now that the storm had ended, the reality of her situation was settling back in. "I should go," she said. "I have put you in danger enough. Where will you go? You have no shoes, no proper clothes, and no money, I assume." She shook her head. "Then you will stay, at least until you are healed and we can figure out a plan." "Samuel, if Gerald finds me here, he could hurt you. He has men who work for him, men who are not afraid to use violence." "Let him come," Samuel said, and there was steel in his voice now. "This is my land, and I decide who is welcome on it and who is not." Over the following days, as the snow slowly began to melt under a returning sun, Nora and Samuel fell into a rhythm. She was still weak from her ordeal, so Samuel insisted she rest and recover. But Nora was not one to sit idle. As her strength returned, she began to help around the house. She cleaned and cooked, tasks she was clearly skilled at from her years working at the restaurant. Samuel found himself looking forward to coming in from his work with the horses and cattle to find the house warm and filled with the smell of cooking food. They would eat together, and gradually, Nora began to open up more. She told him about her childhood, growing up as the only daughter in a family of 4 children. Her mother had died when she was 16, and she had taken over running the household and helping her father with her 3 younger brothers. "That is why my father was so eager for me to marry Gerald," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "He wanted me settled and cared for so he could remarry without feeling guilty. He has remarried. He was planning to, right after my wedding. A widow from town who already has her own children. I think he saw it as killing 2 birds with 1 stone, get me married off and bring in a new wife at the same time. That seems rather cold," she shrugged. "My father is a practical man. He never was one for sentimentality." Samuel found himself growing angry on her behalf. What kind of father would force his daughter into a marriage with a man who hurt her? What kind of father would choose practicality over his child's safety and happiness? As the days passed, Samuel found himself noticing things about Nora that had nothing to do with pity or protection. The way her eyes lit up when she laughed, which was happening more often now. The grace with which she moved around his home, making it feel more alive than it had in years. The sound of her voice as she sang softly while she worked, old songs he half remembered from his own childhood. He was drawn to her in a way that unsettled him. Samuel had been alone for a long time, by choice mostly. He had loved once in his early 20s, but the girl had chosen a shopkeeper from town over a struggling rancher. Since then, he had kept his heart carefully guarded, focusing on building his ranch and living a quiet life. But Nora was working her way past those defenses without even trying. 3 weeks after he had found her in his barn, Samuel was out checking fence lines when he saw riders approaching from the east. 3 men on horseback, moving with purpose toward his ranch. His stomach tightened. He rode back quickly, arriving at the house just as the men were dismounting. The man in front was tall and broad-shouldered, with a handsome face that was currently set in hard lines. His clothes were expensive, his horse well-bred. This had to be Gerald Hoskins. Samuel dismounted and walked forward, placing himself between the men and his house. "This is private property." "State your business." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "I am looking for someone, a woman named Nora Sullivan. I have reason to believe she might have passed through this area." "And what business do you have with her?" "She is my fiancé. She went missing several weeks ago, and her family is very worried about her." "Funny," Samuel said, his voice flat. "Most men looking for their worried fiancé do not bring armed men with them." Gerald's hand moved toward his gun, but Samuel was faster, his own revolver clearing leather in a smooth motion. The 2 men with Gerald tensed, but did not draw. "I suggest you get back on your horses and leave my land," Samuel said calmly. "If you are hiding her, you are interfering in a family matter," Gerald said, his face reddening with anger. "I could have the sheriff here." "Then go get the sheriff. But the sheriff will need a warrant to search my property, and last I checked, a grown woman leaving a man was not a crime." "She belongs to me," Gerald snarled, and in that moment his true nature showed through. "We are engaged to be married. An engagement is not a marriage, and even if it were, no person belongs to another." Gerald stared at him for a long moment, and Samuel could see the calculation in his eyes. He was measuring whether it was worth the fight. Finally, he seemed to decide it was not, at least not right now. "This is not over," Gerald said, swinging back into his saddle. "If I find out you have been hiding her, I will be back with the law." "You do that," Samuel said, his gun still trained on the men. He watched them ride away, not lowering his weapon until they disappeared over the rise. Then he turned and found Nora standing in the doorway, her face pale. "He found me," she whispered. "He was looking, but I did not confirm you were here. He knows. You can tell he knows." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Samuel, he will come back, and next time he will bring more men." Samuel holstered his gun and walked to her. "Let him come, we will figure this out." But she shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. "You do not understand. Gerald always gets what he wants. He has money, influence. If he decides you are in his way, he will destroy you." Samuel reached out and gently cupped her face, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "Nora, look at me." She did, her green eyes swimming with fear and grief. "I am not going to let him take you. I do not care how much money he has or how many men he brings. You are under my protection now, and I keep my word." "But why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you risk everything for me?" The answer came to him clearly, though he had been avoiding it for weeks. "Because somewhere between finding you in my barn and now, I started to care about you. More than I probably should, more than is wise, but there it is." She stared at him, and he saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes. "Samuel, He dropped his hands and stepped back. "You do not have to say anything. I know the timing is not right and you have been through hell. I just needed you to know why I am not backing down." She caught his hand before he could move away completely. "I was going to say that I feel the same way. I have for days now, but I was afraid to admit it, even to myself." His heart stuttered in his chest. "Nora, you saved my life, but more than that, you gave me hope that there are good men in this world. Men who are kind and gentle and strong in all the ways that matter." She moved closer to him. "I do not want to leave here. I do not want to leave you." Samuel pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, pressing her face against his chest. He rested his chin on top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Then stay. Stay with me, and we will face whatever comes together." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, and then she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, then deeper as he responded, his arms tightening around her. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I will stay," she whispered. "For as long as you will have me." "Forever then," he said, and kissed her again, but their peace was short-lived. 2 days later, Gerald returned, and this time he brought the sheriff and 4 more men. Samuel met them at the edge of his property, his rifle in his hands. The sheriff, a middle-aged man named Tom Porter whom Samuel had always gotten along with, looked uncomfortable. "Samuel, I need to ask you some questions." "Ask away, Tom. Gerald here claims you are harboring his fiancé against her will. He says she is not in her right mind and needs to be returned to her family." "That is interesting," Samuel said calmly, "because from where I stand, Miss Sullivan is a grown woman who made a choice to leave a man who was hurting her. And last I checked, that was her right." "She is confused," Gerald interjected. "She has always been prone to hysteria. Her father agrees that she needs to come home." "Why do you not let her speak for herself?" Samuel suggested. "That seems like the fair thing to do." Tom nodded. "That is reasonable." "If Miss Sullivan is here, I would like to speak with her." Samuel considered for a moment, then nodded. He turned and called toward the house. Nora emerged, and Samuel saw her square her shoulders as she approached. "Miss Sullivan," Tom said, tipping his hat. "These men claim you left your home without permission and that you are not thinking clearly. They want you to return." Nora looked directly at Gerald, and her voice was steady. "I left because Gerald Hoskins was violent toward me. He hurt me, Sheriff. I have the scars to prove it if you need to see them. I left to save my own life." Gerald's face darkened. "That is a lie. I never laid a hand on her." "You grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises that lasted for days," Nora said, turning her gaze to him. "You told me I belonged to you, that I would marry you whether I wanted to or not. You scared me, Gerald, and I do not scare easily." "Even if what you say is true," Tom said carefully, "that does not explain why you did not go to your father or to me." "I went to my father. He told me I was being dramatic and that the wedding would go forward. As for coming to you, Sheriff, I knew that Gerald has influence in Miles City. I was afraid no one would believe me over him." Tom looked troubled. He turned to Gerald. "Did you hurt her?" "Of course not. She is making it up to avoid her responsibilities. Her father agrees with me." "Her father is not here to speak for himself," Samuel pointed out. "But I am here, and I can tell you that when I found Nora, she was half frozen, terrified, and covered in cuts and bruises. She had been walking for 3 days in a blizzard to get away from this man. People do not do that unless they are desperate." Tom rubbed his face. "This is a mess." "No, it is simple," Samuel said. "Nora is an adult. She does not want to marry Gerald Hoskins. She has the right to make that choice." "She is my fiancé," Gerald said through gritted teeth. "We had an agreement." "An agreement she is breaking," Nora said firmly. "I do not want to marry you, Gerald. I am sorry if that hurts your pride, but it is the truth." For a moment, Samuel thought Gerald might try something violent. His hand hovered near his gun and his face was flushed with rage. But then Tom stepped between them. "That is enough. Miss Sullivan has made her choice clear. Unless you have proof that she is not of sound mind, there is nothing more I can do." "This is not over," Gerald said, his eyes locked on Nora. "You will regret this." "Is that a threat?" Samuel asked, raising his rifle slightly. Tom held up his hands. "Everyone calm down. Gerald, I suggest you and your men leave, now." For a moment it seemed like Gerald might refuse. But then he turned and mounted his horse. Before he rode off, he looked back at Nora one more time. "You were mine, Nora. You will always be mine. No one leaves me." Then he was gone, his men following behind him. Tom turned to Samuel and Nora. "I do not like this. Gerald Hoskins is a proud man, and you just humiliated him in front of his men." "What was I supposed to do?" Nora asked. "Marry him to spare his feelings? No, of course not. I am just saying to be careful. Men like that do not let things go easily." He tipped his hat. "If you have any trouble, you send word to me immediately." After Tom left, Samuel and Nora returned to the house. Nora was shaking, and Samuel pulled her into his arms. "That was very brave," he said. "I was terrified." "I know, but you stood up to him anyway. That is what courage is." She clung to him. "Do you think he will come back?" "Probably. But we will be ready." Over the next few weeks, Samuel made preparations. He reinforced the doors and windows, stocked up on ammunition, and made sure his rifle was always within reach. But no attack came. Gerald seemed to have disappeared, and gradually they began to relax. Spring came to Montana, the snow melting into streams that fed the prairie grass. The ranch came alive with new life. Calves were born and the horses grew sleek and fat on the fresh grass. Samuel worked long days, and Nora was always there beside him, helping where she could. She learned to milk the cow, tend the chickens, and even helped with branding. She was stronger than she looked, resilient and determined. Samuel found himself falling more in love with her every day. They settled into a life together that felt natural, as though they had known each other for years instead of months. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. She told him her dreams of someday opening her own restaurant, a place where people could come and feel at home. He told her about his plans to expand the ranch, maybe buy more land to the west. "We could do it together," he said one evening, taking her hand. Build something that is ours. She looked at him, her eyes soft. I would like that. He pulled a ring from his pocket then, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. Then marry me, Nora Sullivan. Be my wife, my partner, my everything. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes. Yes, Samuel. I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, and it felt like a promise, like a future unfolding before them. They were married a week later in a small ceremony in Miles City, with Tom the sheriff standing as witness. Nora wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself, and Samuel wore his best suit. It was not fancy, but it was perfect. That night, as they lay together in his bed for the first time as husband and wife, Nora traced the lines of his face with her fingers. I cannot believe this is real, she whispered. That I get to have you after everything. It is real, he promised, and I am never letting you go. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Afterward, she lay with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, and felt safer than she ever had in her life. Summer brought its own challenges. A drought settled over the land, and Samuel worked long hours trying to keep his cattle watered and fed. Nora was always there, helping however she could. She was no longer the fragile woman he had found in his barn. She had grown strong, capable, her body tanned from the sun and her hands calloused from work. One evening in late July, as they were finishing dinner, they heard horses approaching. Samuel immediately tensed, reaching for his rifle. But when he looked out the window, he recognized the rider. It was Nora's youngest brother, James, a boy of 17 with the same dark hair and green eyes as his sister. He was alone and looked exhausted. Samuel opened the door, keeping the rifle ready but pointed down. James Sullivan, does your father know you are here? James dismounted, his legs nearly giving out. No, sir, and I need to talk to Nora. It is urgent. Nora appeared behind Samuel, her face shocked. James, what are you doing here? I rode all day to warn you, James said, his words tumbling out fast. Gerald is planning something. I heard him talking to some men in town. He is hiring gunmen, Nora, rough men from out of territory. He is planning to come here and take you back by force. Samuel felt ice spread through his veins. When? I do not know exactly. Soon, maybe days. I just knew I had to warn you. James looked at his sister, his eyes pleading. I am sorry, Nora. I did not understand before. I thought you were just being stubborn about the wedding. But I heard the way Gerald talked about you, like you were property he had lost. It scared me. Nora ran to her brother and threw her arms around him. Thank you for coming. That took courage. What about father? Samuel asked. Will he tell Gerald that James came here? James shook his head. Father does not know I left. I snuck out after everyone was asleep. You need to get back before he realizes you are gone, Nora said. I am not leaving you here to face this alone. You are 17 years old, Samuel said firmly but not unkindly. This is not your fight. You warned us, and we are grateful. But the best thing you can do now is go home and act like nothing happened. If your father or Gerald suspects you helped us, they could take it out on you. James looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded. Just promise me you will keep her safe. I promise, Samuel said, on my life. After giving James food and water for his journey back, they sent him on his way. As soon as he was gone, Samuel and Nora began to prepare. We could leave, Nora said as they reinforced the windows. Just pack up and head west, start over somewhere new. We could, Samuel agreed, but running would not solve anything. Men like Gerald do not give up. He would keep hunting you and we would spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. So what do? We make our stand here. This is our home and we have a right to defend it. I do not want you to die for me, Samuel. He stopped what he was doing and came to her, taking her face in his hands. I am not planning to die. I am planning to live with you for a very long time. But if Gerald wants a fight, I am going to give him one he will not forget." 2 days later they came. Samuel spotted the dust cloud from the riders while he was up at dawn checking on the horses. He counted at least 8 men, maybe more. He ran back to the house, his heart pounding. "They are here," he told Nora. She had been expecting this, and her face was set with determination. She picked up the rifle he had been teaching her to shoot. "What do? We hold them off until help arrives. I sent word to Tom yesterday. If he got my message, he should be on his way with deputies." They took up positions at the windows, watching as the riders approached. Gerald was in front, and the men with him had the hard look of professional gunmen. They stopped about 50 yards from the house and dismounted. Gerald cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, "Nora, I know you are in there. Come out now and no one has to get hurt." Samuel kept his voice calm and steady as he shouted back, "This is private property and you are trespassing. Leave now and we will not press charges." "I am not leaving without what belongs to me," Gerald yelled back. "Send her out or we are coming in. She does not belong to you or anyone else. She is my wife now and she is staying with me." There was a pause and then Gerald laughed, but it was an ugly sound. "Your wife? You think marrying her makes her yours? I will have that marriage annulled and I will have her back." "That is not going to happen." "Then you leave me no choice." Gerald drew his gun and fired at the house. The window next to Samuel's head exploded and Nora screamed. Samuel returned fire, aiming high, not trying to kill but to warn. The other men scattered, taking cover behind rocks and a water trough. For the next hour it was chaos. Bullets flew back and forth, and Samuel and Nora fired back whenever someone tried to advance on the house. Samuel was careful with his shots, making each one count. He had enough ammunition to hold out for a while, but not forever. A bullet shattered the lamp on the table, and another punched through the wall inches from Nora's head. She flinched, but held her ground, firing back with surprising accuracy. Samuel felt a surge of pride even in the midst of the fear. Then he heard the sound he had been praying for. More horses, approaching fast from the west. He risked a glance and saw Tom the sheriff with 6 deputies, riding hard toward the ranch. "This is the law," Tom shouted as they reined in. "Drop your weapons now." Gerald and his men hesitated, looking at each other. They were outnumbered now and they knew it. "This is a domestic matter," Gerald shouted. "That woman is my fiancé and this man is keeping her from me." "That woman is Samuel Evans's legal wife," Tom called back. "And you just opened fire on a private residence. Drop your weapons or I will arrest every last one of you." For a long, tense moment, Samuel thought Gerald might be crazy enough to keep fighting. But then, one by one, his men lowered their guns. Gerald was the last, his face twisted with rage, but finally he too let his weapon fall. Tom and his deputies moved in quickly, disarming the men and putting them in chains. Tom himself came to the door of the house. "You two all right in there?" he called. Samuel opened the door cautiously. "We are fine. Scared, but fine." Tom looked at Gerald and shook his head. "Gerald Hoskins, you are under arrest for assault, trespassing, and attempted kidnapping. Your father is going to have a hell of a time getting you out of this one." As they led Gerald away, he turned back to Nora one last time. "This is not over," he screamed. "Do you hear me? It is not over," but it was. Samuel could see it in Tom's face in the way the deputies manhandled Gerald onto his horse. Gerald had gone too far and there would be consequences this time. After everyone left and it was just Samuel and Nora again, they stood in the wreckage of their home and held each other. Nora was shaking and Samuel was not much better. "It is over," he said, saying it out loud to make it real. "It is finally over." She pulled back to look at him. Is it? Really? Yes. Gerald will go to trial, and with what he did today, he will likely spend years in prison, and even if he gets out, he would be a fool to come after you again. She let out a shaky laugh. I cannot believe we survived that. We did more than survive. We won. They spent the next few days cleaning up and repairing the damage. Tom came by to take their statements and assured them that Gerald would be locked up for a long time. Apparently, this was not the first time he had been violent, just the first time anyone had been willing to stand up to him publicly. You two did the right thing, Tom said. Standing your ground. Sometimes that is the only way to deal with bullies. Nora's brother James came by a week later, this time with their father. Samuel tensed when he saw the older man, but to his surprise, Mr. Sullivan looked ashamed. Nora, he said, his voice rough. I came to apologize. James told me everything, and I realized what a fool I have been. I should have believed you. I should have protected you. Nora stood stiff in her father's embrace, but gradually she softened. I wanted you to believe me so badly. I know, and I will regret not listening to you for the rest of my life, but I hope in time you can forgive me. I can try, she said, and that was enough for now. Life slowly returned to normal. The summer passed into fall, and Samuel and Nora worked together to bring in the harvest and prepare for winter. But this winter was different from the last. This time, Samuel was not alone. He had Nora by his side, and his house felt like a home. On the first anniversary of the night he had found her in his barn, Samuel woke to find Nora already up, staring out the window at the snow that had started to fall overnight. Thinking about last year, he asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Yes, can you believe it has only been a year? It feels like a lifetime ago. A lot has happened. She turned in his arms to face him. I have something to tell you. There was something in her voice that made his heart skip. What is it? I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby. For a moment, Samuel could not speak. He just stared at her, joy spreading through him like warmth. Are you sure? Yes. I have suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain before I told you. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing. A baby! Nora, this is wonderful, she laughed with him. And when he set her down, there were happy tears in both their eyes. Their son was born in early summer of 1882, a healthy boy with Nora's green eyes and Samuel's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after the sheriff who had helped save their lives. Little Tommy, as they called him, was the light of their lives. Watching Nora with their son, Samuel was struck by how much had changed in 2 short years. The frightened woman he had found in his barn was gone, replaced by a confident mother and wife who ran their household and helped with the ranch as an equal partner. As Tommy grew, they had more children. A daughter they named Rose came 2 years later, followed by twin boys, Michael and Matthew. The house that had once been so quiet and empty was now filled with noise and laughter and life. Samuel expanded the ranch as he had dreamed, buying more land and increasing his herd. Nora eventually got her restaurant, a small establishment in Miles City that quickly became popular for her excellent cooking and warm hospitality. They hired help to run it so she could spend most of her time with the children, but she still loved going into town a few days a week to cook and chat with customers. Gerald Hoskins was released from prison after 5 years, but he never came near them again. Samuel heard through town gossip that he had left Montana entirely, moving back east to live with family. Good riddance, Samuel thought. Nora's relationship with her father slowly healed over the years. He became a doting grandfather who spoiled the children whenever he visited. He never remarried, and Samuel suspected he never stopped regretting his actions toward Nora, but they learned to move forward. Years passed, and Samuel and Nora grew older together. Their children grew up strong and healthy, and eventually they started having children of their own. The ranch passed to Tommy, who ran it with the same care and dedication his father had. On a spring evening in 1911, 30 years after the night Samuel had found Nora in his barn, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Samuel's hair was gray now, and Nora's face showed the lines of a life well lived, but to him, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. "You ever regret it?" he asked, taking her hand. "Running into that blizzard, everything that came after," she smiled and squeezed his hand. "Not for a single moment. That blizzard led me to you, and you gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A real home, children, love that does not hurt or control but lifts up and makes me stronger. You did the same for me," he said. "I was just going through the motions before you came into my life. You made me remember what it means to truly live." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sound of their grandchildren's laughter mixed with the soft lowing of cattle in the distance. "The snow melted," she said softly, echoing a conversation they had had many years ago. "But I never left your side. And I never wanted you to," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. They watched the sun set together, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and pink, and Samuel thought about how a single act of kindness on a cold winter night had changed both their lives forever. He had simply done what was right, offering shelter to someone in need, but that choice had brought him more happiness than he ever could have imagined. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, they went inside together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Because they had learned that together, they could weather any storm. Years continued to roll by with the changing seasons. Samuel and Nora's love only deepened as they faced the joys and challenges that life brought them. Their children established their own families nearby, creating a network of love and support that stretched across the Montana prairie. In 1915, Samuel fell ill with pneumonia during a harsh winter. Nora nursed him back to health with the same determination she had shown when facing Gerald Hoskins all those years ago. She sat by his bedside day and night, refusing to leave even when their children begged her to rest. "You saved my life once," she told him as she pressed a cool cloth to his fevered forehead. "Now it is my turn." He recovered, but the illness left him weaker. He could no longer work the ranch as he once had, so Tommy and his brothers took over most of the physical labor. But Samuel still rode out every morning to check on things, with Nora often riding beside him on the gentle mare he had given her years ago. They would ride to the top of the hill that overlooked their land and sit together, watching the cattle graze and the horses run. From there, they could see the barn where their story had begun, still standing strong after all these years. "I think about that night sometimes," Samuel said one morning. "What if I had not gone to check on the horses? What if I had waited until morning?" "But you did not," Nora said firmly. "You went, and you found me, and everything happened exactly as it was supposed to." "Do you believe in fate?" he asked. She considered the question. "I believe that sometimes the universe puts people in each other's paths for a reason. Whether that is fate or coincidence or something else entirely, I do not know. But I am grateful for it, whatever it was." Their grandson, Tommy's eldest son Samuel Jr., loved to hear the story of how his grandparents met. He would beg them to tell it over and over, never tiring of the tale of the blizzard and the barn and the brave woman who ran away to save herself. "Tell me about when you found Grandma," he would say, climbing into Samuel's lap even though he was getting too big for it. And Samuel would tell the story again, never leaving out the details. He told about the howling wind and the snow that stung like needles. He told about finding her huddled between the hay bales, more dead than alive. He told about carrying her through the storm and slowly nursing her back to health. Nora would add her parts of the story, about the fear and desperation that had driven her into that blizzard, about waking up in a strange house and realizing she had been saved by a good man, about slowly falling in love as the snow melted and spring came. And then Grandpa fought off the bad man. Samuel Jr. would ask, even though he knew the answer. Then we fought off the bad man together, Nora would correct gently. Your grandfather and I have always been a team. Young Samuel would nod seriously, absorbing this lesson about partnership and courage. As Samuel and Nora entered their 70s, they slowed down but never stopped. They still took their morning rides when weather permitted. They still sat on the porch every evening, holding hands and watching the sun set. They still shared the same bed they had shared for over 40 years, still whispered secrets and dreams to each other in the darkness. The restaurant in Miles City had long since been passed to their daughter Rose, who ran it with the same warmth and skill her mother had shown. It had become an institution in the town, a place where 3 generations had eaten and made memories. On a warm summer evening in 1921, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. It was Samuel and Nora's 40th wedding anniversary, and their children and grandchildren had come from near and far to honor them. The yard was filled with tables laden with food, and lanterns hung from the trees, casting a warm glow as the sun began to set. There was music and dancing and laughter, the kind of joy that only comes from a family that truly loves one another. Samuel stood with difficulty, his joints stiff with age, and raised his glass. "I want to say something," he announced, and the crowd quieted. 40 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known. It was not a fancy wedding. We had no money, no prospects, nothing but each other and a stubborn determination to build a life together. He looked at Nora and his eyes were moist. "You have given me everything, Nora. Children, grandchildren, a home filled with love. But most of all, you have given me yourself every day for 40 years. You are my partner, my best friend, the love of my life, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." The family cheered and clapped, and Nora wiped tears from her eyes as she stood to join him. Samuel handed her the glass, and she took a sip before speaking. "Samuel Evans, you saved me in more ways than you will ever know. You gave me shelter from the storm, but you also gave me freedom, respect, and a love I never thought I would find. You saw me not as property or as something to possess, but as a person, an equal. You have been my rock, my safe harbor, my home. I love you more today than I did 40 years ago, and that is saying something." They kissed as their family erupted in applause and cheerful hoots. Tommy stood up next and raised his own glass. "To my parents," he said, "who taught us what true love looks like, what commitment and partnership and respect look like. You set the bar high, and we are all better for it." The party went late into the night, with grandchildren eventually falling asleep on blankets spread on the grass while the adults continued to talk and laugh. Samuel and Nora sat together in the rocking chairs that had been brought outside, watching their family with contentment. "We did good," Samuel said softly. "We did very good," Nora agreed. As they entered their 80s, their bodies began to fail them in small ways. Samuel's hearing grew poor, and Nora's hands became gnarled with arthritis. But they adapted, as they always had. Samuel learned to read Nora's lips, and she found new ways to do her beloved knitting despite her painful hands. They spent more time sitting than moving now, but they still made it to the porch every evening. Sometimes Tommy or one of the other children would carry them out if walking became too difficult. But they always made it, determined to maintain this ritual that had become sacred to them over the decades. One evening, in late autumn of 1925, as they sat watching the leaves fall from the cottonwood tree in the yard, Nora turned to Samuel with a peaceful expression. "I am tired, my love," she said softly. Samuel understood what she meant. He took her hand, feeling how fragile it had become. "I know, I am tired too. We had a good life, did we not? The best life. No regrets," she smiled. "Only that we did not have more time. But 45 years is more than many people get. If I could, I would give you 45 more. I know you would. But Samuel, when the time comes, do not be far behind me. I do not want to be without you, not even in whatever comes next. I will be right there," he promised. "Just like I have been since the night I found you in my barn." Nora passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 weeks later. She simply did not wake up one morning, slipping away with a smile on her face. The family mourned, but there was also a sense of rightness to it. She had lived a long, full life, surrounded by love until the very end. Samuel took her death hard. Without her by his side, he seemed to shrink, becoming even more frail. He still insisted on being taken to the porch every evening, but now he sat alone, staring at the empty chair beside him. "She was supposed to be here," he would say to whoever was sitting with him. "She never left my side, not since that first night." "She is still with you, Pa," Tommy would say gently, "just in a different way now." 6 months after Nora's death, on a spring morning very similar to the one when he had found her 45 years before, Samuel passed away. He was sitting in his chair on the porch, a blanket over his legs, when he simply closed his eyes and stopped breathing. The family found him with a smile on his face and Nora's old shawl clutched in his hands. On the table beside him was a letter he had written the night before. Tommy opened it with trembling hands and read it aloud to the gathered family. "My dearest children and grandchildren, by the time you read this, I will have joined your mother and grandmother on the other side. Do not be sad. I have lived longer than I ever expected, and I have been blessed beyond measure. I want you to remember the story of how your grandmother and I met. Remember that sometimes the greatest love stories start in the darkest moments. Remember that kindness matters, that doing what is right matters, even when it is hard. Your grandmother taught me that love is not about possession or control. It is about partnership and respect and lifting each other up. It is about facing storms together and building something beautiful on the other side. Take care of this land. It has been good to our family. But more importantly, take care of each other. Family is everything. And if you ever find someone huddled in your barn, literally or figuratively, be the kind of person who offers them shelter. You never know how that single act of kindness might change both of your lives. I love you all. Be good to each other." Samuel Evans. There was not a dry eye in the room when Tommy finished reading. They buried Samuel next to Nora on the hill overlooking the ranch, under the shade of a cottonwood tree they had planted together decades ago. On the shared headstone, Tommy had inscribed, "Samuel Evans and Nora Sullivan Evans together in life, together in eternity. The snow melted, but she never left his side. Years later, the ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. Tommy's sons worked it, and then his grandsons. The barn where Samuel had found Nora was eventually replaced, but everyone knew the story of what had happened there on that snowy night in 1881. The restaurant in Miles City, now called Nora's Place in honor of its founder, still served meals to travelers and locals alike. Inside, on the wall, hung a photograph of Samuel and Nora taken on their 40th anniversary, forever captured in a moment of joy and love. The story of the cowboy and the woman in the barn became a legend in the area, told and retold, sometimes embellished but always true at its core. It became a story about courage, about choosing love over fear, about two people who found each other in the middle of a storm and built a life that lasted long after the snow melted. And every winter, when the first snow fell over the Montana prairie, the descendants of Samuel and Nora would gather at the ranch. They would stand by the graves on the hill and remember the man who offered shelter and the woman who had the courage to accept it. They would remember that the greatest love stories are built not in moments of comfort, but in moments of crisis, when people show their true character. The ranch thrived for generations, a testament to the foundation that Samuel and Nora had built. Their great-great-grandchildren would walk the same land, work the same fields, and sometimes, on quiet evenings, they would swear they could see two figures sitting on the old porch, holding hands and watching the sunset. The story of Samuel and Nora became more than just a family history. It became a reminder that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, that kindness is never wasted, and that sometimes the most important decision you will ever make is to open your door to someone who needs shelter from the storm. Their love story, which began with a howling wind and a frightened woman huddled in a barn, became a legacy that stretched across time. It reminded everyone who heard it that true love is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It is about showing up day after day, standing by your partner through every storm and choosing each other over and over again until the very end. The snow melted, but she never left his side. And in the end, he made sure he never left hers either.